Coming up on New Day at Arirang, the COVID-19 crisis intensifies in South Korea. Officials projecting new infections over the past 24 hours to top 6,000. Should that forecast be confirmed, it will be a record daily high for the country. President Moon Jae-in tells a UN peacekeeping conference in Seoul that his proposal for an end-of-war declaration, if it materializes, would be the first step toward lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. Plus, with tensions threatening to bubble over in regards to Ukraine, the leaders of the United States and Russia hold a virtual summit. President Biden warning President Putin that any Russian invasion of Ukraine will be met with real costs.
Good morning and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on Wednesday, December 8th here in Seoul, South Korea. I'm Kim Mo-gen.
And I'm Mark Broom. It's wonderful to have you with us as we head into the middle of the work week. Over the next hour or so, we will take a look at the biggest news stories of the day and get some expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world. Our starting point, though, on this Wednesday morning is the COVID-19 situation here in South Korea. We are expecting to see another record number of new daily COVID-19 infections. This comes as concerns rise that a cluster infection of the Omicron variant among members of a church in Incheon is now here in Seoul.
For more on this and other related updates, joining us in the studio is our reporter Shin Yeun. Good morning, Yeun.
Good morning.
So like always, Yeun, let's start with the numbers of new COVID-19 infections today. Usually the figures are relatively higher on Wednesdays. What are we expecting today?
You're absolutely right. We're actually expecting to see the highest tally ever reported here in the country. Wednesday's figures will surpass 6,000 and maybe even reach the low 7,000s because up to 9 p.m. Tuesday, the country reported the highest number ever reported during this time at 5,704. This was 2,146 more than what had been reported at the same time the day before and 1,847 more than the same time last week.
And tell us about the Omicron variant. We know it's here in South Korea now. How is that situation unfolding?
Well, on Tuesday, we saw the number of Omicron cases in the country go up by 12, bringing the total identified to 36. There are worries that the cluster outbreak found at a church in Incheon could have now spread to universities in Seoul as 3 students attended the church. One student had come into contact with a total of 139 students in the library and 30 more at an offline class. What's worrisome is that some of the Omicron infections we've witnessed so far have been transmitted very quickly. One person has been infected by just being inside the same restaurant as an individual with Omicron. As a matter of fact, they had only come into contact for 1 to 2 minutes, prompting authorities to say that Omicron seems to be much more transmissible than the Delta variant. They added there's a very high chance that Omicron could spread through the air, which means the variant could spread not just through direct contact, but by staying in a closed space for a considerable period of time with someone that has been infected. It remains to be seen just how contagious Omicron is and how easily it can spread compared to other variants.
So like you've just said, we still don't know much about Omicron, but how much longer should we wait to know more details about Omicron and how will it affect us?
Right, that's a very good question that many have been asking. Experts around the world say that it may take 2 to 3 more weeks. At the moment, they're studying how easily the Omicron variant can be passed from one person to another. Early data suggests that current COVID-19 vaccines can prevent Omicron patients from developing severe illness or symptoms. In the U.S., Dr. Anthony Fauci, the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, said Omicron is, quote, almost certainly not more severe than Delta. While talking to news outlets on Tuesday, Fauci cited data from South Africa. He said the ratio between the number of infections and the number of hospitalizations seemed to be less than the Delta variant. He added that Omicron seems much more transmissible than Delta because it had spread to more than 50 countries since it was first detected roughly a month ago. Yet again, we still need to see more data and see whether this case is really true.
Right, so what you're saying is we still don't have a clear picture of how contagious Omicron variant is. But what we do know is that it is spreading across various parts of the world. So tell us more about that.
Right. If I could start off with South Africa, the first country the Omicron variant was detected. The variant is now the dominant strain there. 228 have been confirmed with this strain. Along with the uptick in Omicron cases, daily COVID-19 cases have also jumped nearly 40-fold over the last month, from around an average of 270 to 10,600 per day. The Maldives have also seen its first case of the Omicron variant on Tuesday in a tourist from South Africa who arrived in the country on November 27th. This tourist had arrived before the Maldivian government banned travel to the Maldives from 8 countries in Africa, including South Africa. Now, Israel, boasting one of the highest vaccination rates in the world, has also seen Omicron cases go up. The number rose to 21 on Monday. The health ministry said of the 21 cases, 13 were fully protected, which in Israel means anyone who has received a booster shot, recovered from COVID-19, or received their initial 2 vaccine shots within the past 6 months.
All right, Ian, thank you for your report. We hope you stay protected as well. Talk to you again tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yes, seems to be getting worse rather than better, and we'll find out the official numbers on how many new cases in a couple of hours from now. Moving on, the IMF could cut its growth forecast for the euro area due to concerns over the Omicron variant and persistently high inflation.
This is according to the agency's managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, speaking Monday on CNBC. As of October, the IMF forecasts 2022 growth in the eurozone to reach 4.3%. The IMF's main concerns, she said, are growing supply pressures, high energy prices, and new virus restrictions. She added the biggest threat to the world economy is still COVID-19, and that while the IMF advocates vaccinations, there has not been enough progress. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has ordered officials to keep close tabs on the economy and financial markets, noting growing global uncertainties caused by the pandemic. Speaking at a cabinet meeting Tuesday, he also called for efforts to address concerns related to logistics and the supply of raw materials. President Moon also thanked lawmakers for passing next year's $515 billion budget, saying it will boost spending to provide customized support for the self-employed and for quarantine and medical efforts. He asked for the public's understanding when it comes to tightened social distancing restrictions, emphasizing the next 4 weeks will be crucial. He also stressed the need for vaccinated people to get booster shots and to speed up inoculations for teenagers. South Korea has logged a current account surplus for an 18th month in a row in October. However, the surplus was smaller than the previous month and on year. Although exports were up, they were offset by rising imports triggered by high prices for energy and raw materials. Ji-young with the details.
South Korea posted a current account surplus for the 18th straight month in October. The Bank of Korea said on Tuesday that the sum of the balance of trade came to a surplus of $6.95 billion. Exports in October came to around $55.6 billion, up 24% compared with the same period last year. They were up on year for the 12th straight month in a row. Export growth was led by semiconductors with a more than 28% increase on year, with priming materials and petroleum products also seeing strong outbound shipments. But the size of the current account surplus was down compared to the previous month and down on year. This was due to a large rise in imports amid high oil and raw material prices. Imports increased around 38% compared to the same month last year, with raw material imports rising about 71%. The services account posted a surplus of $630 million, mainly due to a record surplus of around $2 billion from the transport sector, driven by a hike in shipping rates. However, the Korea Development Institute, a state-run think tank, said Tuesday that amid supply disruption, global demand contracted in December and the recovery in the manufacturing sector would be limited. It stated that although there has been a gradual economic recovery in South Korea led by the service sector with the easing of social distancing measures, uncertainties have increased with the spread of the Omicron variant. It said the tightening of distancing measures could restrict the recovery of private consumption in the country. An expert said the effect of Omicron variant will depend on its severity.
If it is more dangerous, then it may have long-term consequences which will reduce consumption because we have to increase distancing. And it may reduce exports because foreign demand will fall because they will be doing distancing of their own. And the supply network might be affected even further.
But he added that if the variant turns out to be less dangerous, then the economic recovery will continue and the country could eliminate distancing measures sometime next year. 엄지영, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. Consumer prices in South Korea last month spiked by a whopping 3.7%. For context, that's a high not seen here in nearly a decade. The price of food, utilities, public services and oil have all surged in recent months, and prices show little sign of slowing down anytime soon. Making matters even worse, salaries are most definitely not keeping pace with inflation, and many studies have shown that the government's COVID-related financial support has not eased the financial worries of a great many households.
And also, as more people aren't opening their wallets as much, less money is flowing into the economy, making it a vicious cycle. For more, we connect to Professor Oh Jun-seok from Sookmyung Women's University School of Business. Professor, good morning.
Morning.
Now, how concerned are you about the growing gap between the haves and have-nots in South Korea, and what can be done to remedy this?
We had a flashing beacon, K-shaped polarization could be a social burden, as you mentioned, and act as a hindrance to sustainable economic growth in the future. In the past, Korea came in the middle of the OECD Gini scale. It's a barometer of income inequality. But recently, according to the report by the Federation of Korean Industries, Korea's comprehensive conflicts index stood at 55.1, with range of 0 to 100, ranked 3, just behind Mexico at 69 and Israel 56.5. The higher the ranking, the severer the level of social conflicts. Based on this measurement, Korea became a highly unequal society, though they believe, including myself, Korea has been relatively equal society. The government policy aims to ease economic discrepancy, but in actuality, the policy mostly has been swayed by vote calculation. Burning money on the street could hypnotize daily burden, political rage and anger, but it never kept warming for the long time. Job creation and upgrading social mobility is the key, and then designing and operating infrastructure for the lesser group to keep themselves moving forward and upward, that is the right solution. Let them running.
Right, we'll get to social mobility in just a moment, but the vast majority of businesses hardest hit by the virus restrictions that have been imposed on us here in South Korea are the smaller mom-and-pop stores, as we like to call them here. Do you think the pandemic and the government's reaction to it has made this issue of wealth inequality that much more acute?
I'm afraid I think so. As COVID-19 pandemic has been a shock to the economy, it is reasonable to talk about the resistance and resilience against the shock. We could guess, other things being equal, big companies and so-called the haves are afforded to sustain their business or a normal pattern of living relatively longer than those are not. While most of us were in lockdown, there was lower consumer demand and reduced industrial activity, in spite of the fact that the government reaction had no other choice but to increase consumption. But from the view of economics, there leaves room for development, especially timing of policies. In a way to curb down the expansion of the pandemic, the government took a radical action of lockdown. It's a sudden death of all business cycle. As it is proved, the pandemic has prolonged longer than expected. Business people have been sick and tired of a repeated cycle of shutdown and back to the normal. As a result, what happened? They tried to minimize tension point with the market uncertainty, shrinking their businesses, consumption and employment directly. Income polarization has widened accordingly. Expansionary fiscal policy and monetary policy should have been slow and aligned more on targeted income group. With urgency, it has spread widely, turned out to be source of poke battle. As a response, what happened? Series of interest rate hike has done and will be expected afterward, and cut down household loan will make unequal accessibility of financial service widen again.
And also, Professor Oh, another factor stifling social mobility in South Korea is real estate and the constantly rising housing prices. Many young South Koreans have given up hope of ever owning their own home. Apart from the economic impact of that, what are the social and demographic ripple effects? For example, most Koreans want to own their own home before they get married and start a family.
That must be a big question, but I have only a small answer. In finance, as target investment, assets are classified as risky asset and risk-free asset. Under uncertainty, people are prone to put their money in the risk-free asset first. Savings accounts were once considered as risk-free asset, but near zero interest rate deletes its name from the list because it is not protected against inflation. Instead, money goes directly to the housing market. The young are in despair, forced to invest directly risky assets, so-called cryptocurrency or blockchain whatsoever. In the entry stage of a social life, what the young wants most would be providing safe harbor as a stepping stone. That eagerness represents the demand and price increase in the housing market in Korea. Household debt, mostly used for purchasing houses, grows 7.9%, far exceeding Bank of Korea target line of 6%. Starting from the ground zero, it might be next to impossible to have their own houses. They have lost hope amid quality jobs scarcities. 1 out of every 4 are without full-time job. They try to survive on part-time job without genuine complaint. Job openings are mostly for delivery workers. This is why Big Bang approach rather than step-by-step approach attract the young with rage and revolt. The surge in unemployment and the wealth gap aggravated inequality and stifled the social mobility. Korea would be unable to go forward or upward unless these big questions are solved.
Yeah, it truly is a bit of a depressing situation for a great many people right now in Korea, the state of the economy and their prospects looking forward years and decades to come. But finally, some people, particularly younger people, have argued that it's high time now that South Korea introduce some kind of basic income system, a guaranteed source of money from the government to help people who've either been laid off or too sick to work. We've seen this in a number of European countries, seems to work quite well. What's your stance on introducing universal basic income, or UBI, here in South Korea?
It is to the point at this point to start the discussion of universal basic income. I agree, but it is not the right timing of introducing universal basic income because it is high time of stagflation. Stagflation is when there is a high inflation with stagnant economic growth. Economics is the science of choice. When you choose something in the market, you have to pay the price for the choice. Politics and even mass media are prone to exaggerate the effects of choice only at the sacrifice of cost the society to pay. A few countries, as a test program for 1 year, has introduced a universal basic income already with no significant causality between basic income and job opportunities. In 2017, Finland tested as an experiment introducing basic income for the unemployed. In 2018, Sweden also tried to start a universal basic income for supporting low-income group. There are cases of experiment and result till now, there is no effect. Instead of spreading income, creating income is the solution. It is needed for the less income group to create income in the market competition, easily accessible regardless of their wealth gap or endowment by government policy support. Universal basic income cannot be used as an instrument of an exit from the market, which stifles their capability of upward mobility.
All right. Professor Oh, like always, thank you so much for your insights, and we'll hope to talk to you again soon.
Be my pleasure.
Now, on the first day of the Seoul UN Peacekeeping Ministerial Conference, President Moon Jae-in called for international support for his proposal to declare a formal end to the Korean War, saying it will lead to lasting peace and the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Min Suk-hyun with this report.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in has called on the international community to support Seoul's efforts to declare a formal end to the Korean War. In a congratulatory speech at the 2021 Seoul UN Peacekeeping Ministerial Conference on Tuesday, Moon stressed that the end of war declaration was the first step to peace on the Korean Peninsula.
종전선언이 한반도 평화와 비핵화의 첫걸음입니다. 종전선언을 통해 화해와 협력의 새로운 질서를 만들고 한반도의 평화, 나아가 동북아와 세계 평화를 이룰 수 있도록 국제사회가 함께해 주길 바랍니다.
Moon also said that the country would do more for UN peacekeeping operations around the world to help war-torn nations build lasting peace. He vowed to dispatch more medical personnel to the nation's peacekeeping units, as well as provide more equipment to UN peacekeeping operations around the globe. South Korea's Defense Minister Seo further elaborated on the country's pledges to contribute to UN peacekeeping missions. This includes a plan to offer 16 500MD helicopters for operations in Africa, as well as a plan to provide an additional $1 million to the Peacekeeping Trust Fund, which will be partially used to facilitate a UN smart camp. The 2021 Seoul UN Peacekeeping Ministerial Meeting is being held virtually for 2 days from December 7th to the 8th. The forum brings together foreign and defense ministers from 155 countries, as well as other senior officials and related international organizations. This evening, on the second day of the meeting, former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is scheduled to give a special speech before the closing ceremony. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
The environment ministers of South Korea, China and Japan have vowed to cooperate over the next 5 years in 8 areas, including air quality, water management and climate change. This coming on Tuesday as the 3 countries held the 22nd tripartite environment ministers meeting, during which the ministers discussed ways to ramp up environmental cooperation. They adopted a joint communique containing collaborative efforts on regional and global environmental issues. The meeting was inaugurated in 1999 and has been held annually ever since, apart from last year when it was cancelled in light of the pandemic. The leaders of the US and Russia held a virtual summit Tuesday as tensions simmer over Russia's military build-up near Ukraine. White House officials say President Biden voiced deep concerns about Moscow's military build-up there. Russian President Vladimir Putin conveyed Moscow's unease about Washington's involvement in that part of the world. Kim Hyo-sun with this report.
Virtual talks between U.S. President Joe Biden and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin have concluded, with the two leaders discussing a wide range of issues. The first publicly known call between the two presidents since July comes as tensions mount over Russia's military buildup near Ukraine. During Tuesday's 2-hour-long meeting, the White House said President Biden voiced deep concern over Moscow's escalation of forces in the region. Biden also stressed the U.S. and its European allies would respond with strong economic and other measures in the event of a military escalation. He also reiterated his support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as a return to diplomacy. U.S. intelligence estimates Russia has mobilized some 175,000 troops along its border with Ukraine. President Putin said Russia wants a guarantee the U.S. and NATO won't advance military operations in Ukraine. Putin has long stressed he wants a guarantee Ukraine will not join NATO, which the Biden administration has already dismissed, noting only NATO members decide when other nations join the alliance. Ahead of the call, a Kremlin spokesperson told reporters Tuesday that Putin has been keen to maintain good and predictable relations with the U.S. In addition to Ukraine, the two leaders discussed the U.S.-Russia dialogue on strategic stability, the issue of ransomware, as well as cooperation on regional issues, including on Iran. Kim Yo-san, Arirang News.
China's embattled real estate giant Evergrande did not make payments on Monday on some U.S. dollar bonds at the end of a 30-day grace period. According to Reuters and Bloomberg, citing sources, some of Evergrande Group's offshore bondholders did not receive overdue coupon payments as the company failed to pay back $82.5 million in interest payments. The cash-strapped property developer is now close to a formal default. Should it be the case, it would trigger cross defaults on its roughly $19 billion worth of international bonds, putting it at risk of becoming China's biggest ever defaulter. The UAE will shift to a working week of 4.5 days with a Saturday to Sunday weekend to better align its economy with global markets. The country currently has its weekend on Friday and Saturday. However, from January 1st, the weekend will start on Friday afternoon, including for schools, so the weekend starts before Muslim prayers. That said, private companies will be free to choose their own working week. Over the past year, the UAE has been pushing to make its economy more attractive to foreign investment. And now we cross over to our Oh Soo-young for global insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. It is time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. The annual Seoul Dialogue on Africa begins this week to explore how South Korea and countries in Africa can broaden and strengthen their relations. And it may only be the fourth time that this conference is being held, but it's becoming more and more significant as the two sides look to expand cooperation not only in trade, but various global challenges. We discussed this special relationship today with Boris Ondo, founder and president at the African Youth Action Foundation. It's lovely to see you again, Boris. How are you doing?
Very well. Thank you for having me, Soo-young.
Right. Well, thanks for joining us. And, well, let's start with this Seoul Dialogue on Africa, which has been taking place for the last few years. What is the significance of this forum, particularly amid this ongoing pandemic? I mean, what kind of key discussions are you expecting to hear?
Well, thanks again, Soo-young, for having me on your show. You know, there's never been a time in history like today when multilateralism or multilateral cooperation is needed in global issues, such as the pandemic, as you rightfully mentioned. And I think that as the dialogue with Korea is starting on the Korea-Africa relation is starting, we're looking at more prospects of mutual beneficial partnerships between South Korea and African countries. But we are also looking at an interesting cooperation to better combat, to better address the issues of COVID-19 pandemic. We are also, furthermore, looking at the discussions to approach the Korea-Africa relations and raise people's awareness of Africa in Korea. So overall, there are a lot of interesting topics that we're looking forward to having addressed at this Korea-Africa dialogue coming up.
Well, developments in Korea-Africa relations are relatively recent. They're considered to have taken off in 2006. What's been the main form of engagement or relations between the two sides, and what have been some milestones?
Well, true. Korea-Africa ties are considered to have taken up in 2006, but Korea-Africa ties actually go way back, even since the Korean War. And after the Korean War, we've had a good number of African countries who have helped the Korean people during the Korean War. Countries like South Africa, countries like Ethiopia. Korea then received support from those countries. Even after the Korean War in the 1960s, 1970s, the ties with the African countries have started with the establishment of different diplomatic relations with African countries and different state visit or presidential visits and political support of African countries in Korea and Korean countries to Africa. We have the visit, for example, of the president of Gabon, who visited Korea in 1975, and President Chon Do-won of Korea, who visited several African countries in 1982. And Korean even obtained the status of observer at the African Union in 2005. And that's how, after 2005 and 2006, the ties really took a different turnaround. And we have seen different activities that have been organized, different dialogues, different declarations on the Korea-Africa forums, the Korea-African Declaration of 2009, the Seoul Declaration of 2012, the Africa-Korea Framework of Cooperation of between 2017 and 2021. We also have visits of Korean presidents to Africa. For example, in 2011, we have President Lee Myung-bak, who visited South Africa and the Democratic Republic of Congo and Ethiopia, for example. We have President Park Geun-hye, who has visited in 2016 different African countries. So Korean-Africa ties go way back, and we expect them to go even stronger as the dialogue, like the Seoul Africa dialogue, has installed, so that mutual beneficial partnership, mutual beneficial interest can find a way to find common ground on leveling them up on such a time.
Right, of course. And well, South Korea certainly commemorates every year the sacrifice of many African soldiers from South Africa, from Ethiopia, who really sacrificed themselves to help fight communism in this country and really help this nation build itself to what it is today. And well, in recent years, though, we've been cooperating on development as well. And what's distinguished South Korea as a development partner? Are there any programs that really stood out to you?
Certainly. Korea has been very excelling on the ODA program towards African countries. For example, for several years, African countries have been receiving a lot of aid from Korea, and Korea has been establishing programs like the Korea Government Scholarship Programs, which have been one of the beneficiary, and different other development programs with organizations like KOICA on the ground in Africa doing good work. And there are many other programs like the Sema Ulundong program that has also been implemented in many African countries. Well, Korea-Africa share very much a past of colonialism and extreme poverty and interesting revolutions and democratization history. And Africa today is evolving from these issues that Korea has overcome already. And I think on this common, similar past that Korea and Africa share, there is a huge possibility and a good potential for great relationship or greater relationship in the future. And we really much look forward to having such with events like the Seoul Dialogue Forums organized today.
Well, for now, it seems like we're still in the stage of discovering how we can expand this cooperation, whether it's through trade or cultural exchange. But how is South Korea generally perceived in the countries on the African continent that it has engaged with so far?
Well, I wouldn't venture on trying to talk for all African countries, but from my independent observer's eye, I feel there is still some distance in the relationship between Korea and Africa. Perceptions are still very distant. Perceptions are still distorted, and there's still great work to do to bring them to a good fix. African countries don't know Korea much yet, and Korea, on the other hand, as well, doesn't know African countries much yet. And good initiatives like the Korea-Africa Foundation that the Korean government has launched through its Ministry of Foreign Affairs to help Korea have a better understanding of the African continent is actually something we need to salute. But obviously, more needs to be done to arrange or bring that perspective, that perception of Africa in Korea to good fix, even that perception to Korea in Africa into good fixes. And I'm very optimistic that given such programs, such events, and many other programs that can come ahead, we will get to a good level of that.
Well, many countries around the world, they see a huge growth potential in Africa. And, well, South Korea's a little late to the game, to be honest. But, well, and because, of course, Africa already has a number of traditional partners and new entrants that aim to maximise their interests in the continent. What are some core shared interests that South Korea could maybe leverage and work on with Africa?
Well, as I said before in the beginning, Korea and Africa share a very interesting, similar history. Just like African countries, Korea has known colonization. Just like many African countries, Korea has known extreme poverty and many democratic issues as well. So I consider that there couldn't be a better partnership that would exist if not the Korea-Africa partnership, because the bond could be really tight, given on a good understanding of each other, given a good empathy for each other. So I believe that if those things are looked into, this is a relationship that could go a long way, and one of the partnerships that can be much stronger in our period of time today.
Well, today we're seeing this US-China rivalry in the world sort of expanding into the African continent. And, well, how do you see that affecting the continent's plans for economic and diplomatic expansion?
Obviously, it has, when the two largest economies in the world are fighting, are into a rivalry, stand by countries that are just smaller economies will definitely suffer from it. And we have seen that in the past 2 years, how that U.S. protectionism has been destructive to some African economies. And diplomatically, there's also been a risk of adding the perception that the U.S. is apathetic towards the regions of Africa. And ultimately, that perception has led the other one, larger economy, Beijing, to use it as a trade war to sow anti-U.S. sentiment and bolster its image in Africa in favor of foreign partners like itself. So I think that that rivalry has been an impediment to many African economies, and it has also played a huge significant point on the diplomacy of many African countries.
Well, it seems that infrastructure is going to be is going to have a lot of sticking points due to this US-China rivalry. And do you think maybe perhaps that's an area that South Korea and Africa can work on, given that South Korea has a number of telecommunication companies and IT companies that could really join hands with maybe local providers and manufacturers in Africa and really foster a new sort of tech relationship?
Definitely. This is a branch that South Korea could actually grab and penetrate the African market. It is an opportunity that is given. As I said, the U.S.-China war or rivalry has changed many paradigms in the diplomatic sphere of the African countries. And I personally believe that it could be high time also for the African countries to look east into their diplomatic strategy, and looking east, Korea could be one of those good partners, given the know-how that it has and the enormous potential that Africa has in terms of natural resources, its youth, and the opening market that is rising in Africa. So South Korea could do well to really seize that opportunity to penetrate the African market, which is still very open and with many opportunities that are still there. South Korea would do well to seize that opportunity, bringing its know-how to Africa, especially in areas that it excels, like IT, technology, semiconductors, and so on. There are opportunities in Africa for South Korea to seize, but it boils down to that capability of South Korea to see Africa as a land of opportunity and bridge that distance that still exists between the two regions. And it is high time for that to happen. And events like the Seoul Dialogue on economic forums like that are really opportunities for these points to be addressed and these opportunities to be presented in a better way and highlight them and also enlighten the perceptions of both Africans and Koreans on the enormous possibilities that a good partnerships between the two regions could bring and the beneficial bounds that exist there.
And well, you've played a very central role here in South Korea in terms of leading efforts to gather young people for collaboration and innovation. How can young people really foster and benefit from the potential of increased South Korean-Africa relations?
Well, Africa is considered and is even called the Blue Continent, a very young continent. As you know, more than half of the African population is a young population, and it is even expected to be younger by the year 2050. So the young people today are those who will lead Africa tomorrow. And if we bring them together with Korean young people today, we are sure to be building a solid partnership for the future, and a partnership that could really help a relationship bolstered between Africa and Korea. So part of the efforts that we have been leading in the African Youth Action Foundation is really to not only empower the African young people for them to be an interesting and outstanding tool for development in their respective African countries, but also to help them see how Korea has evolved over the years, how Korea has developed over the years, and take it as a great example for prospective development back in Africa. And I think that it is the same effort that the Korean government should be also putting in, because investing in African young people today is actually investing in a stronger partnership between Africa and Korea in the future. It has already led a lot of efforts in that sense. As I said, I'm one of the beneficiaries of the Korea Africa Scholarship that has been provided by the by the Korean government for a long time. And I think multiplying such initiatives and investing in African young people is going to be very beneficial for the Korean government in the future.
So a lot of potential and a lot of new exciting opportunities to look forward to. Thank you very much. That was Boris Ondo, founder and president at African Youth Action Foundation. Again, it was lovely speaking to you. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Now, visitors to a certain well-known district here in Seoul now have the option to hail a self-driving car. The service that uses the autonomous vehicles is now open to the public to use. While there are only 2 routes available right now, it is set to expand in the near future. Kim Bok-young reports.
In the near future, you might not need a driver's license nor have to struggle to keep focused on long-distance drives, as self-driving vehicles are no longer just a fantasy.
Seoul Metropolitan City has introduced its first autonomous vehicle hailing service in a pilot zone in Ondo, taking one major step toward commercializing its driverless car project. Let me show you how it works.
Self-driving vehicles are following designated routes around the neighborhood in Western Seoul's Mapogu district, stopping at certain locations just like a shuttle bus. Riders can call the cars at the station through the autonomous vehicle application TAP.
The car moves by itself, but under the current law, there should be a safety driver who is available at all times to take over in an emergency.
Inside the child protection zone, the car should be hand-operated, and if anything unexpected happens, a safety driver is ready to handle the situation. Other than that, the car drives by itself.
On the designated route, the car can analyze the traffic flow by itself and change lanes, sense the traffic lights, go left or stop. It can also recognize pedestrians and carefully turn right too.
For now, there are 4 vehicles, but 2 more self-driving vehicles, including 1 driverless bus, will begin their services by the end of December, bringing the total number of autonomous vehicles in operation to 6. Seoul City plans to run more than 50 autonomous vehicles in Sangam-dong alone by 2026. For the first month, people can take the self-driving cars for free. The startup behind the technology says it has benefited a lot by being able to try it out at the autonomous mobility testbed.
The research in autonomous driving technology has taken place in many places, but it is significant how such technology is applied to a real service in real situations, with feedback from a variety of other traffic participants.
Data collected through the service could contribute in developing more practical self-driving technology. Kim Bok-young, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. One of the suspected killers of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi was arrested at Charles de Gaulle Airport on Tuesday as he was about to board a flight to Riyadh. A source says a former royal guard of Saudi Arabia was the suspected killer and was on a French wanted list. He was arrested on the basis of a warrant issued by Turkey in 2019, and French prosecutors will now begin proceedings for a potential extradition there. The arrest of the suspected killer came just days after French President Emmanuel Macron held face-to-face talks in Saudi Arabia with defective ruler Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman becoming the first major Western leader to visit the kingdom since Khashoggi's murder. A U.S. intelligence report from March noted that the Crown Prince had approved the operation to kill or capture Khashoggi. However, the Saudi government has long denied any involvement. Khashoggi was a longtime critic of Prince Mohammed and was last seen entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in October 2018. His remains have not been found, while Turkish officials believe his body was dismembered and removed from the premises. Israel on Tuesday announced the completion of a sensor-equipped underground wall on its side of the Gaza border. The construction of the wall is said to be a countermeasure developed after Hamas militants used tunnels to blindside its troops in the 2014 clash. Going public with the project in 2016, Israel also revealed an above-ground fence, a naval barrier, radar systems, and command and control rooms.
Today, with the completion of this project, which is mostly hidden, we deprive Hamas of one of the capabilities it tried to develop, and it places an iron wall of sensors and concrete between the terror organization and the residents of the Israel's south.
The Defense Ministry said the smart fence includes hundreds of cameras, radar, and other sensors, and spans 65 kilometers across and 6 meters high. The completion of the fence required the use of 140,000 tons of iron and steel and took 3.5 years to complete. Tesla CEO Elon Musk warns the biggest threat to humanity is the declining birth rate, adding that the civilization will crumble if people don't start having more children. Speaking at the Wall Street Journal's annual CEO Council on Monday, the father of 6 made the remark in response to a question about how his company's not-yet-released Tesla bot could solve labor issues. Musk said the Tesla bot could be increasingly critical to businesses if human labor supply falls. His latest comment wasn't the first time he warned of the declining birth rate, as he said in 2017 that the population bomb could soon go off, adding the world's population is accelerating towards collapse. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. Springtime-like afternoon warmth continues today with highs to go 5 to 7 degrees higher than seasonal norms across much of the country today. So a morning winter jacket might feel too warm for the afternoon. And as much as we hope for improved air quality in the west, ultrafine dust levels continue to remain high. And those in Chungcheong, Namdo, and Jeollado provinces will need to drive with extra care this morning as mix of dust and fog is blocking visibility. Morning temperatures are kicking off at similar levels to yesterday under lots of sunshine, and Gyeongju is beginning the day at 2 degrees Celsius. Then highs will go up to similar levels to slightly lower today. Daegu, Gwangju going up to 14 degrees Celsius. And other than the west, elsewhere will enjoy normal to good air quality. Warmer than average temperatures are not expected to last that long, as the winter chill will come back next week. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that's where we are going to have to wrap up this Wednesday edition of New Day at Arirang. Thank you for spending the last hour or so with us. I'm Mark Broom.
And I'm Kim Mo-gyun. We'll be back with more news tomorrow at our next edition of New Day at Arirang. Till then, goodbye.
Find the ways of Taekwondo within yourself. The mind that honors respect and kindness. The valor that fears no challenges. The perfect balance of body and mind. Discover yourself.